talent learning how to, engage in e-commerce. We need to think about branding and how we actually produce products that can meet the standards of at the highest level, and so that we can take, for example, Ghana and Nigeria, Ghana and Ivory Coast produce over 70% of the world's cocoa, but we don't have any global chocolate brands. Why? We need to basically now take some young African entrepreneurs from those countries need to learn how to make chocolate, and then how do you brand it properly? How do you do social media campaigns right? How do you build an online e-commerce company that is exporting world-class chocolate, and you're buying it and it's ending up in grocery stores in Switzerland and San Francisco and Shanghai, and this is how we're going to create wealth in Africa. So I think it's an exciting opportunity, and I'm looking forward to young Africans realizing this and being unshackled from some of the challenges that they've had today in doing business, because now they can do business globally and not only deal with the frustrations of the African market.
There is a company in Madagascar, just staying on chocolate for a second, a company in Madagascar which is being run by an American who understands that he can sell $7, $8, $10 bars of chocolates to a particular Brooklyn consumer, and he understands his market very well. He has connections in distribution. He understands the manufacturing side of things, and he's understood the outgrower agriculture side of things as well. And it's a very solid business. It seems to me that the e-commerce part of it is one side. You have to master e-commerce, but you also have to understand the marketing. Well, you have to understand the market. You have to understand your potential distribution channels, and then, as you say, branding, also packaging. How can we structure education to help an entrepreneur who wants to learn understand the whole length of that chain? Because I think you're right. You do have to sell things at $10 and make them at $1 to make profit. But right now, it's the people who understand the market and the distribution, and also perhaps the branding, like Nike and others, who really are making the big profits. How can we teach African entrepreneurs to understand that whole chain?
Well, firstly, as an entrepreneur, you don't have to be an expert in everything, right? I say entrepreneurs solve big problems in creative ways with limited resources. That's ultimately what an entrepreneur needs to know how to do, right? So if you see an opportunity, it's about surrounding yourself with people who understand the different aspects that need to come together to make that opportunity successful. So yes, you don't have to have the skill in agriculture, in agribusiness, and supply chain and logistics, and and food and packaging and marketing and branding, all that stuff. You bring together a team of people who have that expertise. But you as the entrepreneur must have the vision. You must have the courage, the resilience to go through all the ups and downs, and to and be able to raise capital and prove something on a small scale, and then keep going and doing a bigger scale, etc. So, and yes, you're absolutely right. It's not about e-commerce is the final, the last mile, right? That gets you to market. And what has been happening in Africa in the past is that even as an entrepreneur, when you've been able to assemble everything, you have found the experts in manufacturing, you have found the experts in packaging, you have found the experts in logistics, you've built a great team, you've got a great product, and you have done everything that you would be expected to do. You can't make profit because the people that you're selling to can't afford your product. And what e-commerce does is it allows you in a cheaper way to access those. I mean, let me give an example in an unusual industry, the music industry. The Nigerians have shown what is possible when you leverage technology and go global, right? So, today Nigerian musicians can be paid $100,000, $500,000, or $1 million for a concert because they've gone global. They've created I remember Nigerian music videos 10 years ago didn't exist. Now, you go onto YouTube, they've got 50 million views, 100 million views. They're doing international collaborations with global stars, and a whole industry and so many jobs are being created in Nigeria, right? In terms of production and film and all this, and legal and all the things that need to come together to actually create an art, to build that and create that content. But they're selling it globally because they're using YouTube and other e-commerce, and they're building global brands, and now they're able to command significant income for themselves. So they have gone global, but leveraging their African talent and so forth. We can do this in other content, in film, in theater, et cetera, et cetera. There's a massive need for content. And the nice thing about content is it doesn't require much capital. It just requires your creativity, your brain. But we can go through the list and do the same thing in tourism, the same thing in agribusiness, the same thing in education and in healthcare. When you're just thinking differently, we can start to produce products and services and sell them in Africa, but also sell them globally using technology and using different ways of doing things.
The emerging Chinese consumer in Shanghai, in Beijing, in all the great Chinese cities is a huge opportunity. There have now been partnerships between Flutterwave in Nigeria and Safaricom in Kenya with e-commerce platforms in China. Does this herald a potential new wave of destinations for African exports? And if so, how to structure that opportunity? How can African entrepreneurs tap into it? What will they need to be looking at doing?
I think it does herald it, but again, it's not a given. It needs some work to capture it. So, of course, it means understanding the global consumer. So, looking at where is demand. Is it China? Is it Europe? Is it USA for whatever products and services you're selling as an African entrepreneur and as an African business? And then, of course, you have to build relationships there and establish the social capital. So go there and build relationships and form the right partnerships. And then yes, you then have to brand yourself and produce products that match the tastes of those consumers. Whether it's a B2C consumer, a B2B consumer. But yes, it is an exciting opportunity because we can be tapping into the massive Chinese market, the massive market in India, the market in the USA and Latin America. If we and it's not just Alibaba, but it's platforms like Amazon as well that we could be doing this, and we can create an African version of these as well so that you can sell within the African continent as well. But it's really like saying that this moment, many businesses were already under threat of digitization, and we're being disrupted by technology. We need to not be left behind as an African continent, and that's only going to come by developing our human capital, by leaning in technology, and by imagining what the world would look like in the future, and not just hoping that it goes back to the way it was. And that's how we're going to succeed as a continent.
We've been dancing around this question for the last 20 minutes. I want to try and crystallize it. How then do we get to the education of entrepreneurs who can seize these opportunities? How do you help a new class of entrepreneurs flourish, those who can have the vision to seize these opportunities? Great, we've got new e-commerce platforms to execute on, but as you were saying earlier, it's having the vision that counts. But it's very hard to teach entrepreneurship. Why is it that in Nigeria there are, you throw a stick, you'll hit an entrepreneur. In Accra, you might not be so lucky. How can we explain this, and how can we help promote entrepreneurs?
Well, firstly, I don't believe that entrepreneurship is something that you can teach. Same thing with leadership. I think leadership and entrepreneurship is something that can be learned. And what I mean by this, there's a difference between teaching someone to do something and the person learning it by themselves. And this really boils on to, the notion that you can take a horse to the water, but you can't force the water to drink. So there is no bulletproof way of training an entrepreneur. However, there are things that one can do to increase the likelihood of entrepreneurs emerging by themselves, to create the conditions, the ecosystem that allows entrepreneurs to emerge. And that comes from bringing three things together. You need to find people or bring people together who have the traits that create great entrepreneurs, which is not academics, right? They might need some basic academic intelligence, but what much more importantly, it's traits like passion. Do they really have something that they're passionate about? That's going to keep them going through all the ups and downs. Do they have imagination? Can they think about better ways of doing things and innovate? Do they have resilience? Because it's hard, right? And they need to be able to pick themselves up when they hit an obstacle and keep going. And then, do they have courage, right, to do things that haven't been done before? So you need to find people with those traits. Then you need to give them practice, right? Because you learn to be an entrepreneur by being an entrepreneur. It's not a theoretical thing. So they have to, but you do in a very small scale. So, my scale, my example, today I'm building institutions around the continent. I've raised several $100 million. We have 400 employees, and we're going to scale to 20,000 people in the next 10 years. And it's a very large scale initiative. But I got my taste of this when I was 18 in a very, very small scale in a tiny, dusty town in Botswana. When my dad had just passed away, and my mother was a teacher in the town we lived in, and many people approached her to start a school. But she said, she couldn't quit her job and start the school because she had 4 kids to look after. So she started this, but they kept insisting. So she started a small study group, and with 5 children in a church, and it soon grew to about 25 children. And she made me, then by this time I had finished my high school and I had a year to wait to go to college. My mother made me the headmaster of the school at the age of 18. And I ran it for a year, and I, grew to 50 kids and taught and dealt with parents and collected the fees and all these things. And that was my first experience in entrepreneurship as an 18-year-old in a very small scale. That practice is what then led me later on to launch the African Leadership Academy, 7 years later when I was 25. And then it led me to launch the African Leadership University. And then now I'm doing all this. So it's, again, you give people practice in very small, you look at the same thing. Mark Zuckerberg was building something simple in his dorm room when he was at Harvard. Steve Jobs, got an internship at Hewlett Packard when he was 14, and that's what led him on the pathway to eventually create Apple. So we have to find ways of getting young people practice and small ways of entrepreneurship, and then that you learn by doing, and that's how you. And then the third thing you need to bring together is networks, because no matter how good your skills are, no matter how much practice you've gotten, if you don't have access to the right networks, you won't be able to raise the capital you need and the mentorship that you need, etc. So as we think about fostering entrepreneurship, we need to bring those 3 things together. People with the drive and the hunger and the ambition to be entrepreneurs and some of those traits, you need to give them practice in small ways at an early age, and then you need to connect them with networks, and then that ecosystem you will see entrepreneurs emerge out of.
You take 1,000 horses to water, and at least one of them is going to drink. I have some questions for you, and do keep them coming in the chat. Question first from Ruth Golombok, who wants to get your perspective on the impacts of COVID in relation specifically to the issues we've been discussing today, and what is different for Africa compared to other parts of the world.
Well, thank you. I mean, there's a couple of things where Africa has an advantage and some things where we're at a disadvantage. One of the things that we have as an advantage is that we are a young population. So I mentioned earlier that the average age of an African is 19. If you go to the other side of the age spectrum, about 5% of Africans are over the age of 60. That compares to over 30% in Italy and about 18% in South Korea. So one of the advantages we have during this COVID era is that I mean, and a lot of the research is showing that COVID tends to affect the elderly more